This section is titled The Truman Presidency, and the focus question is, what major domestic policy initiatives did Truman undertake? After the war, President Truman faced the monumental task of shifting America from war to peace. The more than 12 million men still in the military in 1945 wanted to return to their families and jobs, and demobilization occurred rapidly. While some veterans found civilian life difficult, others used GI Bill benefits to build or buy homes, start small businesses, and go to college. Most veterans went into the labor force, taking jobs from more than 2 million women workers. The government dismantled wartime agencies that regulated industry and labor and set price controls, which sparked immediate inflation. Backed by Democratic liberals and unions, Truman in 1945 tried to revive New Deal politics with a program he eventually called the Fair Deal. This would improve the social safety net and raise living standards. Truman pressed Congress to hike the minimum wage, create a national health insurance system, and increase public housing, Social Security, and educational aid. The year 1946 was one of labor revolt. The American Federation of Labor, or AFL, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, launched Operation Dixie to bring unions to the South and end the anti-labor conservatism of Southern politics, sending hundreds of labor organizers into the region's textile mills, steel factories, and fields. With no more overtime work for war production and skyrocketing inflation caused by the end of price controls, workers' real income dropped sharply. Workers, 5 million of them, responded by going on strike to demand wage raises. 750,000 steelworkers conducted the single largest strike in U.S. history up to that point. Even Hollywood studios shut down because of striking workers. One observer called it the closest attempt at a general strike in United States history. The strike wave alarmed President Truman, who became hostile to the unions and won an injunction to force striking coal miners back to work. In the 1946 elections, middle-class voters, scared by labor unrest, voted Republican, and many workers angry at Truman's policies stayed home. The Democrats lost both houses of Congress to the Republicans for the first time since 1920. Operation Dixie capitulated to the opposition of Southern employers and white workers' racism, keeping intact Southern political power in Washington. The 1946 elections secured the continuing domination of the Congress by a coalition of conservative Republicans and Southern Democrats. Republicans turned aside Truman's Fair Deal program and enacted tax cuts for wealthy Americans. Over a presidential veto in 1947, Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act. The act sought to reverse some of the gains made by organized labor in the past decade. Among other things, it authorized states to pass right-to-work laws prohibiting compulsory union membership. It also forced union officials to take anti-communist oaths. The act made it considerably more difficult to organize unions, and over time contributed to the decline of organized labor's share of the national workforce. President Truman in his first term embraced civil rights for African Americans, departing from the Roosevelt administration's relative lack of concern. The war against Nazism and its racial theories had raised black militancy and consciousness about the plight of black Americans. Many states established commissions on fair employment practices, and cities passed laws to end discrimination in jobs and public accommodations. A civil rights coalition of labor, religious, and black groups supported these efforts. By 1952, the NAACP had raised the number of black voters in the South to 20%, and in that year, no lynchings took place as many law enforcement agencies started to crack down on the practice. Significantly, sports started to desegregate after the Brooklyn Dodgers added Jackie Robinson to their team in 1947. Robinson had a history of civil rights activism and was tried and acquitted in 1944 when he refused to move to the back of a bus in Fort Hood, Texas. Robinson promised the Dodgers leadership that he would not respond to racist taunts. The tactic won Robinson nationwide respect, and his talent won him the Rookie of the Year award. His success opened the door to the integration of baseball and led to the demise of the Negro Leagues. In 1947, a commission on civil rights appointed by Truman issued a report titled To Secure These Rights, calling on the federal government to end segregation and guarantee equal treatment in housing, employment, education, and criminal justice. The Truman administration, calling the report, quote, an American Charter of Human Freedom, end quote, hoped to deflect Cold War criticisms that American racial relations violated democratic ideals and human rights. Truman soon presented to Congress a comprehensive civil rights program, asking for a federal civil rights commission, anti-lynching and anti-poll tax laws, and laws for equal access in jobs and education, but Congress rejected it. But in the summer of 1948, Truman desegregated the military, which became the first large integrated institution in American history. Truman went on to help construct the most progressive Democratic platform in history for the 1948 elections, which included a robust civil rights plank. When liberals at the 1948 Democratic Convention passed the civil rights plank, many Southern delegates walked out. These so-called Dixiecrats soon formed the States' Rights Democratic Party and nominated for president Strom Thurmond, the governor of South Carolina. This party's platform called for, quote, complete segregation of the races, end quote. And though he denied being racist, Thurmond argued that the freedom of the states to govern themselves was imperiled. Truman also faced a second political insurgency from the left. Left-wing critics of Truman's foreign policy formed the Progressive Party and nominated Henry A. Wallace for president. Wallace proposed expanding the welfare state and denounced segregation more vigorously than Truman. Wallace differed most strongly from Truman over the Cold War. He called for international controls on nuclear weapons and advocated trade with the Soviet Union. Yet when Wallace welcomed the support of socialists and communists, opening the party to communist influence, liberals abandoned his candidacy. Though Wallace threatened Truman on the left, and Thurmond threatened him in the Democratic South, Truman's primary challenger was the uncharismatic Republican candidate Thomas A. Dewey. Truman campaigned furiously, criticized the Congress for its inaction, and recycled New Deal critiques of Wall Street and warnings that Republicans wanted to end Social Security. This election was the last before television transformed electoral politics by minimizing in-depth debate and presentations of ideology and policy. Despite a widely predicted Dewey victory, Truman won an overwhelming majority in the Electoral College. For the first time since 1868, Black Americans decisively influenced the outcome. Thurmond carried 4 Southern states, anticipating a later shift of these Democratic states' voters to the Republican Party, and Wallace received fewer votes than Thurmond, an outcome that made criticism of America's Cold War foreign policy even less acceptable.